competitor. Who knew? Who knew? So meanwhile, here is the clip collage, which I refer to as the lobster monkey man, understanding the lobster monkey manifold. Thank you for your time and attention. Wait. Okay, now.
Because if this little corner of the internet doesn't figure out how to continue to talk to the village, we will in some ways suffer the fate of the church that Scott talked about at the beginning of this. Because here we are. And what exactly are we doing? And I think part of what we're doing is we are trying to continue the process of integrating what we have learned through science and its daughter, modern technology, into the very old structures of the church, the monastery, and the academy. I think it's right there in the question of the framework where we can, that's exactly where the contribution of this little corner, thank you, Sevilla, where is she?
Right there.
There she is. Thank you, Sevilla, who gave us that. It's there that I think we can bring to the village a conversation of intelligibility. Because all of this question of, well, why did you talk about us leaving a spirit in Thunder Bay?
Like you give people propofol, you take them out of consciousness. It's a general anesthetic, and as you bring them back in, what you can see is when they're unconscious, the brain breaks down into local networks, and then when they become conscious, it reconfigures as a multi-scale small world network, and that of course lines up with Tononi's theory in some pretty important ways. Or a similar way, you can, I forget what it's another anesthetic was used, and I was talking with Brett Anderson about this recently, and you bring people back, and you can see also self-organizing criticality kicking in again. And that's because the firing and the wiring actually mutually constrain each other. And you can actually do this with binocular rivalry too. So you have an image that's presented to two fields of vision, and they can't be held together, and so phenomenologically you switch between them. And then you can see the self-organizing criticality. This area is firing in synchrony, corresponding to seeing the triangle, and then that breaks up criticality, and this area fires in synchrony when you're now seeing it as the square. And you can actually track the consciousness with the flipping of the self-organizing criticality.
If for something to exist as one, the multiple aspects of that thing, whatever it is, because they could also exist in other ways. They have millions of other ways in which they could exist. Right? They could have other functions, they have to give themselves to the one. Okay? So, of course, remember what I said. You could say, it happens through man. That's totally fine. I'm not saying that the parts of the glass have this will, that they're giving up their will and that they're moving towards the unity of the glass. Like, I'm not saying that, but if that's how you want to understand it, that's also fine, whatever. I'm just trying to help understand that there's a need for idiosyncrasy to be sacrificed towards the whole. And that is how things actually cohere into one.
The rover very much becomes a totem. The idea that the relationship between the one and the many in the object is, because I've been thinking of it just in terms of, you know, the bottom-up, top-down emergence emanation stuff that's going on in cognitive science, but the way you reinterpreted it as something like a kind of sacrificial relationship between the aspects and the through line, and the through line and the aspects, and that in that sense, if I'm right, you're trying to see an ontological analog for love, so that love when we're in love, we're actually participating in a way that is also found in how things are participating in their being, and that love then there gives us a participatory experience of something central to the ontology of things. Is that fair?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
The bees are doing this and the squirrels are doing this, and the squirrels don't get together and sort of have a meeting and say, well, it's who's been like leaving little scratch marks on the roots to let us know exactly how many days that are. The squirrels aren't doing that. There's no Department of Centralized Squirrel Intelligence that is sort of monitoring all of this. And
the first is a proposal comes straight out of 4E cognitive science. It's now being regarded not even as that controversial. I've published a bunch of papers in important journals on cognitive science. With work I did with Dan Shappy about the NASA scientists moving the rovers around on Mars as a specific case study. The idea that cognition is not just individual but distributed. The idea is that networks of human beings are like our networks of the, so we network computers together in the internet, we release the power of distributed computation, we can network embodied brains together, release the power of distributed cognition. The idea is that most of our problem solving is actually done with the collective intelligence of distributed cognition. I didn't invent English, I'm not running the electric grid, I didn't make this microphone, I didn't build this building, right? And so we've tended to sort of blind ourselves to this because of the Enlightenment's emphasis on autonomy, and then Locke's notions of individualism and things like that, which I think can be independently questioned on philosophical grounds. But the idea in cognitive science is that there is a collective intelligence for distributed cognition that has problem-solving abilities. That's why it's cognitive. That is not it can solve problems that individuals can't solve, and no, it's not just a summative aggregate. There's some mathematical proofs for that, and so that's the idea of distributed cognition. And then the idea is have human beings related to that superordinate agency in the past by thinking of gods and angels. This is not a bizarre proposal. I mean, it's the core of Durkheim's whole approach. Does that? Well, there are two things that come up for me for that, and again, I don't want to monopolize. I mean, we're now when are you? I mean, because I mean, we're now when we have dynamical systems theory and complexity theory, we are willing to posit these weird kinds of entities, like strange attractors in state space, right? And we talk about that, and they sort of represent that sort of data compression you're talking about. And there's a sense in which they're real, and they have an explanatory function, but there's a sense in which they're not real, like the way physical objects are real. They don't have a fixed spatio-temporal location. Like evolution isn't an object. You can't. Oh, there it is over there, right? It's distributed across time and space, and it represents a sort of attractor function within state space, and that it's an abstract object, but it's not abstract in the sense of not being causally present. That's what I'm trying to get at. And so before that, you have the idea that no, there's many things, and this is Heidegger too, I believe. There are many truths that are not disclosed to us unless we are willing to go through transformation. Mm-hmm. And then your point, which I agree with, that relevance realization is not cold calculation, it's caring, and then truths can come through that if we care in the right way, a transformative relationship to our caring, which is love, and then that gets us into a way of realizing sort of a fundamental ontology of things. Sorry, I'm trying not to use a lot of multisyllabic technical jargon, but I'm just getting this thought now, so I have to fall back into where I feel safe.
The important thing about it is that we have to come to grips with the fact that a true proper cognitive intelligence can still be made of parts. Those things are, and in fact, it has to be. And I think it's a real shame, but I see this all the time. when you have a collective like this, whether it be a group of robots or a collection of cells or neurons or whatever,
curiosity and a desire to enact something, and so then that totem
Yeah.
rises above, you could say, and then it's causal. It causes people to
Yeah,
experience.
they all bind themselves to the life of the rover in really interesting ways.
But the best way to understand the reality of that is to not be afraid of saying, like, these are human. It's the human good, or the good that draws the human into, that is making that possible. So it avoids, because some of the problems is, like, if you think of these angels as have autonomous existence, or these beings that having autonomous existence, it causes a problem. But if you understand that something like we are meant to rule over them.
So does that? Well, there are two things that come up for me for that, and again, I don't want to monopolize, but you and I are really sparking off each other right now. I can feel it. One is, where does that? What's your ontological commitment around that? Does that mean that you would say these entities don't exist unless there are human beings in existence? And then related, are you? I mean, because we're now when we're and what that does is it self-organizes, and you get a structure emerging, right? But then at some point, the structure goes critical. The structure can't actually maintain its own growth. And what you see in the sand pile is it avalanches. And what happens is that's an increase in entropy. The mutual predictability between the sand particles drops. It goes, right? Now, if there's too much criticality, it breaks. But if there's not, what happens is the avalanche spreads the sand out, and now a bigger base starts to emerge, and it can go higher than it could before. So it cycles between, right? It's self-organizing, and then the criticality means it can transcend as it self-organizes. And what you can look at in the brain is you can look at the part that corresponds to the mound being formed. Neurons they will fire in synchrony together, and when they're firing in synchrony together, that tends to correspond when you get a gestalt in aha, right? And then what they do is they break apart and they fire asynchronously. The entropy goes up, and that allows a new synchrony to form, and then they break apart and a new synchrony, and it oscillates. And this is at many levels of analysis, between small groups of neurons all the way up to the entire brain. And
just the word competence is pretty cool in this context, because everybody's good at their job somehow.
Yeah, no, it's really key. And the other nice thing about competency is that, so my central belief in all of this is that engineering is the right perspective on all of this stuff, because it gets you away from subjective terms. People talk about sentience and this and that. Those things are very hard to define. People argue about them philosophically. I think that engineering terms like competency, like pursuit of goals, right? All of these things are empirically incredibly useful, because you know it when you see it, and if it helps you build, right? If I can pick the right level, I say this thing has, I believe this is X level of competency. I think it's like a thermostat, or I think it's like a better thermostat, or I think it's various other kinds of many different kinds of complex systems. In the tadpole, we found that so tadpoles need to become frogs, and to go from a tadpole head to a frog head, you have to rearrange the face.
They need to become frogs.
So the eyes have to move forward, the jaws have to come out, the nostrils move, like everything moves. It used to be thought that because all tadpoles look the same and all frogs look the same, if you just remember, if every piece just moves in the right direction, the right amount, then you get your frog, right? So we decided to test. I had this hypothesis that I thought actually the system is probably more intelligent than that. So what did we do? We made what we call Picasso tadpoles. So everything is scrambled. So the eyes are on the back of the head, the jaws are off to the side, everything is scrambled. Well, guess what they make? They make pretty normal frogs, because all the different things move around in novel paths configurations until they get to the correct froggy, sort of frog face configuration. Then they.
Now, one of the things that when you study the Bible and you study eschatology is that eschatology isn't so much emergence, where we sort of imagine that the present is pushing towards the future. It's much more that the future is pulling the present towards itself. It's almost like the face of the frog is pulling the tadpole's features